Engine Aquila is a mech-based action game that was developed by Lost Toys, published by Atari, and was released on the Xbox and PS2 in January of 2003. At the time, it did receive some praise for being somewhat innovative with its combat, but reviews overall were largely mixed due to other issues. The game takes place in a sci-fi future in which two factions known as the Forsetti and the Muspel are constantly at war with each other for some reason. It doesn't really matter what the reason is, all you need to know is that the Muspel are the bad guys, and you can tell that they're the bad guys because, well, just look at them. Our protagonist of this story goes by the name of Hawk Winter, a factory worker who partakes in illegal street races in his spare time. The game opens up with Hawk being arrested in the middle of a race, but while doing so he impresses some general for the Forsetti army. So what does this general do? Well, naturally he decides to recruit this lawbreaker to his army and give him the keys to their most advanced weapon yet, the battle engine Aquila. The story then follows Hawk as he learns the ropes as a military man, becomes an integral part of the Forsetti army, and works to take the evil Muspel down once and for all. Is the plot interesting? No. Are the cutscenes fun to watch? Also no. Have I forgotten some of the story beats because my brain tuned out from time to time? Absolutely.
I want everything packed up and ready to go by 0400. Now let's move it, people.
Battle Engine Aquila's campaign is a series of short and sweet missions in which you get to pilot a walking tank that can also transform into a jet and hopefully turn the tide of the war. The main gameplay loop sees you defend your base by land or air as the enemy sends soldiers, tanks and aircrafts that you'll have to deal with in a timely manner to avoid failing the mission, and you'll try to prevent the loss of your own troops to complete bonus objectives. The game never gets more complicated than that. You're not required to think about your approach to certain battle scenarios, it's just a case of killing everyone as quickly as possible. Controlling the battle engine itself is fine. It sometimes doesn't feel as precise as you'd like when you're trying to land and transition back to a tank, but other than that, I don't have many complaints with how it feels. Switching to jet mode at the press of a button to zip off to the other side of the map when someone needs help does provide the gameplay with a nice sense of freedom, and a feature that I can imagine being impressive back in 2003. The large mission areas do create a good sense of scale during battles, but unfortunately the combat is the game's weakest aspect and drags the game down from a light-hearted and innovative action experience to a mediocre and repetitive shooter. I think the main problem with the firing matches between you and the enemies is that a lot of the time it feels like you're the only one firing. The AI doesn't present much of a challenge, and as I mentioned earlier, you don't really have to consider your approach or even do your best to keep moving to avoid being hit. Most of my time with Battle Engine Aquila felt like I was just walking or flying to one area of an island, shooting a wave of small enemies and a few big ones, followed by taking off to another spot of the map to do the same thing a few more times until someone over the radio told me mission accomplished. Once the novelty of transitioning from land to air wore off, I was left with a game that I was playing but not really paying attention to. Even though objectives were communicated to me over the radio, I barely had to listen because at a certain point you're just waiting for the red dots to appear on the radar so you can fly over there and shoot all of them down. The visuals for me were hit and miss. The environments and structures are about par for the period, and despite the scale of the locations, the draw distance isn't horrendous. On the flip side, some of the enemy vehicles look noticeably worse when you're up close. You get the occasional texture that looks slightly fuzzy, and from time to time you notice distant assets popping in. There are times when you load up a game and within the first few moments you know you're in for a treat when it comes to voice acting. Battle Engine Aquila is luckily one of those games. Overall, the presentation of the story did give me the vibe of a late 90s, early 2000s budget Saturday morning kids show. Something about the lack of detail and cheesy delivery of dialogue felt like a throwback, which is a positive, but more of a positive that I appreciate ironically.
The Colonel's been telling me a lot about you, kid. Welcome to the hottest unit in the whole damn war.
The sound design is also a bit of a mixed bag. The soundtrack is bland but not offensive to your ears. The sound effects of the weapons and explosions aren't impactful but don't make the game any worse. However, what I do take issue with from an audio perspective is the mixing. There were quite a few times where I blew something up and due to the noise of the chaos, I couldn't even hear what my allies were trying to tell me because the sound effects dominated the vocals so much. I mean, I know I said that the story isn't important, but small things like this don't really help pull you back into the narrative. Battle Engine Aquila is a game that is promising in concept. Large-scale battles in a versatile vehicle is an idea for a game that is worth exploring, but sadly it fails to deliver on some of its less innovative features. The AI isn't smart enough to make it a challenge, and the combat isn't bombastic enough to make it entertaining. Throw in a generic filler story, and that's pretty much the game. The real problem for this title is that it's not a struggle to play, it's just a struggle to care.